Money isn't everything, but people can do anything for money. What can't be bought with money can be bought with a whole lot more money. That was the life philosophy of the notorious boss Nam Kam, a man who used money to control an entire underground empire, commanding respect in Saigon's underworld and leaving behind a controversial legacy. He was born Trung Van Cam in 1947 in the tattered backstreets of District 4, Saigon. His father passed away early, leaving behind a mother who sold noodles by the roadside and a boy with eyes too sharp for his age. From a young age, he learned that poverty wasn't the only enemy. So was invisibility. And in the hem, if you were invisible, you were nobody. He didn't talk much, but he watched everything. While other children played, Cam stood in shadows, observing the grown men who came and went with quiet reverence. Some wore pressed shirts and golden watches, some bore scars and short tempers. These were the ones no one dared cross. These were the ones who never had to explain themselves. Cam watched them closely. He watched how others lowered their voices when they passed, how debts were forgotten when those men simply stared. At 13, he was running errands for low-level gamblers. At 15, he was arrested for stabbing another teenager in a dice game gone wrong. It was a short sentence at a juvenile detention center, but it changed everything. Behind bars, Cam wasn't scared. He was attentive. In that cage of lost futures and broken men, he found his first mentors. Older criminals, serving long bids, spoke not just of crime but of structure. How a gambling den was like a business, how loyalty was currency, and how control wasn't taken by force, but by foresight. By the time he was released, Cam was no longer just another street kid. He was someone with a purpose, someone with a system forming in his head. The Saigon he returned to in the 1960s was ripe for conquest. War was everywhere. American dollars flooded the black market. Government officials were looking the other way as long as their palms were greased. Everyone wanted something, and Cam was prepared to give it to them, at a price. He began with underground card games. Not the flashy kind, not the kind that attracted noise or police. His games were quiet, well-run, and extremely profitable. He recruited dealers who didn't drink, collectors who never spoke out of turn, and muscle who understood when not to flex. He learned to settle disputes with words, not knives. He avoided unnecessary violence, understanding early that the fewer bodies on the street, the longer you could operate undisturbed. As his operation grew, so did his ambitions. He expanded into cockfighting, loan sharking, and sports betting. Every expansion came with a new layer of protection. He didn't bribe policemen. He helped them. He paid their children's school fees, covered their hospital bills, bought them dinner. When someone in uniform walked into one of his establishments, they were treated better than customers. And when those officers needed help, discreet, effective help, Cam was the one they came to. He created an invisible empire. Nothing bore his name, but everything had his fingerprint. Nightclubs, karaoke bars, massage parlors, restaurants, all fronts, all connected. His people kept things smooth, efficient, and clean. Cam never carried a weapon, rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to. Everyone around him understood the cost of failure. His genius lay not in brutality, but in delegation. He trusted lieutenants like Hai Ban, Thun Chan, and Luong Diek to manage zones and maintain discipline. But he never gave too much to anyone. He rotated authority, ensured no one felt irreplaceable. Trust was earned slowly and withdrawn instantly. If someone became too comfortable, Cam pulled back their privileges. If they remained loyal, they were rewarded handsomely. He kept files, information on friends, foes, and especially those who sat between. A judge who frequented a certain club, a journalist with a hidden gambling addiction, a police chief's mistress. He collected facts like ammunition, and when someone questioned his presence or power, he didn't threaten them. He simply reminded them what he knew. More than anything, Cam understood psychology. He once told an associate, "Money isn't everything, but people will do everything for money. That line wasn't meant to impress. It was a rule, a truth he had seen proven 1,000 times. Politicians, reporters, prosecutors, everyone had a price. By the early 1990s, Nam Kam had become more than a gang leader. He was a broker of influence, a man who could make a problem disappear with a phone call, who could place someone's name in or out of a newspaper with a single nod. He didn't just own the streets. He rented the silence of those meant to police them. His operations stretched from Saigon to the north. Wherever there was vice, he planted roots. Each business was audited, cleaned, disguised. He ran his empire like a CEO. There were no official board meetings, but reports came in regularly. Revenue charts, bribe schedules, risk assessments. If something seemed off, someone got a visit, not from Cam, but from someone who owed him everything. He remained discreet in appearance. No gold chains, no limousines, just tailored suits and soft footsteps. While other gangsters broadcast their power, Cam made his known through absence. His name wasn't shouted in streets, it was whispered in corridors. By now, his network included hundreds. Low-level runners, mid-tier enforcers, high-level contacts in business and government. Some were true believers. Some were simply bought, but all were loyal. At least until they weren't. He had a rule: no chaos. If someone got drunk and caused a scene, they were warned. If they did it again, they were replaced. He treated loyalty as a contract. No exceptions. And people respected that. With Cam, you always knew the rules, until, of course, you broke them. His wealth became the stuff of legend. But what made him dangerous wasn't the money. It was the belief that there was no one he couldn't reach. He often joked, "If money can't buy it, then you just haven't spent enough." And too often, that proved true. The legend of Nam Kam wasn't built on fear alone. It was built on function. He made things work. He solved problems no one else could. And for a long time, people didn't just tolerate him. They needed him. Of course, behind every successful crime boss is one thing they cannot control: other people's egos. And Cam's downfall would begin with a woman who had plenty of it. And just like that, folks, even the king of silence couldn't keep his empire from screaming when jealousy joined the party. The empire Cam had built was vast, but it was fragile, like glass held together by invisible threads of loyalty and fear. And in the mid-1990s, a new storm began to gather on the horizon, one that would test everything he had worked for. Her name was Dong Ha, the notorious queen of the underworld from Haiphong. She was fierce, ambitious, and unafraid to challenge the old guard. Where Cam was calm and calculated, she was fire and chaos. And in the brutal world of the Jiang Ho, fire and glass rarely mix without shattering. Dong Ha's rise had been meteoric. From running small gambling dens to controlling entire districts, she carved her path with a ruthless determination that made even seasoned criminals wary. Her presence in Saigon was a challenge, a direct threat to Nam Kam's authority. At first, Cam viewed her as a nuisance, but nuisances, as he well knew, had a way of growing into problems that couldn't be ignored. The conflict began quietly. Small skirmishes in the alleys, disputes over territory, a few gambling dens mysteriously burned down. Then came the threats, thinly veiled warnings delivered through intermediaries. But Cam did not respond with brute force. Instead, he employed the tools that had built his empire: money, influence, and negotiation. He sent envoys, gifts, and offers of partnership. He tried to bring Dong Ha into his network, to make her a part of the system rather than its enemy. Dong Ha laughed. She had no interest in being anyone's pawn. The war escalated. Cam's men clashed with hers in the shadows: brutal beatings, kidnappings, and even murders. Each side sent a message: backing down was not an option. But neither was surrender. For the first time, Cam found himself locked in a battle he could not simply buy or bribe his way out of. Behind the scenes, The tension rippled through Cam's network. Some of his lieutenants whispered doubts. Some wondered if the old ways were enough anymore. A few began to plot their own moves, sensing vulnerability where before there had been strength. Cam, however, remained outwardly composed. He reinforced his security, tightened his information network, and expanded his alliances with local officials. But he knew the battlefield was changing. In those turbulent years, another aspect of his empire began to crack: the trust of those closest to him. The line between loyalty and greed blurred as his lieutenants became bolder, some even more eager to seize power for themselves. Cam's empire, once a tightly controlled machine, now resembled a house of cards. Each deal, each secret, each double cross pushed it closer to collapse. One night at a private gathering, Cam reportedly told his closest associates, "What money can't buy can be bought with a lot more money." It was a reminder, but also a warning. Even in a world where cash ruled, some things cost more than coin. They cost blood, trust, and sometimes everything. The feud with Dong Ha reached its peak with a series of violent confrontations that shook Saigon's underworld. Rumors spread of assassinations, police crackdowns, and whispered betrayals. The city's nightlife dimmed, haunted by fear and uncertainty. Yet even in this chaos, Cam tried to keep the bigger picture in mind. He knew that wars within the Jiang Ho rarely ended with clear victories. They ended with scars, and sometimes new alliances forged in fire. But his enemies had learned his strategies well. Cam's own web of protection began to unravel when a trusted lieutenant betrayed him, secretly cooperating with law enforcement in exchange for immunity and power. The arrest of Cam in the early 2000s shocked the nation. His trial was a media spectacle, exposing the tangled web of corruption and crime he had spun for decades. For many, it was the fall of a giant. For others, the end of an era. But even behind bars, his legacy lingered. His empire may have crumbled, but his methods, the blend of money, manipulation, and control, had forever changed the landscape of Vietnam's criminal underworld. And as for the city he once ruled, it learned a harsh lesson. In the world Cam inhabited, loyalty was a currency as volatile as money itself, and power was never as permanent as it seemed. Cam's power did not come from sheer brutality or flashy displays. It was the quiet authority of a man who understood people better than anyone else in the game. He once said, "Money isn't everything, but people will do everything for money." It was not a boast, but a principle, a code he lived by and used to navigate the tangled maze of human desire and weakness. He was a master strategist, a chess player who thought several moves ahead. Every decision was calculated. Every alliance weighed against the potential risk and reward. He knew that running an empire built on crime was as much about managing personalities as controlling territory. Cam was patient, and patience was his weapon. While others rushed to prove themselves with violence, he took his time. He watched his opponents exhaust themselves, waited for the perfect moment to strike or negotiate. His empire expanded quietly but steadily, like roots underground. One of his greatest talents was delegation. Cam never micromanaged, but he never lost sight of what was happening beneath him. His lieutenants operated with a clear understanding of their boundaries and responsibilities. He rotated power among them, preventing anyone from becoming too powerful or comfortable. He rewarded loyalty generously, but punished betrayal without mercy. Behind his calm demeanor was a ruthless will. Disloyalty was the greatest sin in Cam's book. Yet he was also pragmatic. He knew that in his world, alliances were fragile and sometimes required difficult compromises. Still, he kept his inner circle small and fiercely loyal, often involving family or childhood friends who owed their lives to him. His empire's foundation was not just on fear, but on a system of influence and protection that extended far beyond the streets. Politicians, police officers, journalists, many were either indebted or intimidated. Cam's strategy was simple: make it more profitable and less risky for them to work with him than against him. He never needed to wield a gun to gain compliance. He wielded information and favors. Cam's businesses ranged from casinos, clubs, and massage parlors to loan sharking and illegal gambling dens. Each front was carefully managed to appear legitimate while funneling profits back to the core operations. This layering made it difficult for authorities to trace and dismantle. But Cam's empire was more than money and power. It was a social network where debts were recorded not just in cash, but in favors and silence. The phrase, "what money can't buy can be bought with a lot more money," became his mantra, reflecting his belief that no obstacle was insurmountable with enough resources. This mentality permeated every corner of his operation. When confronted with obstacles, whether a hostile rival, an inconvenient official, or a legal threat, Cam's response was to outspend and outmaneuver. Bribery, intimidation, and strategic alliances created a buffer so thick that most challenges dissolved before they even reached him. One of the most notorious episodes illustrating this approach was his handling of the police investigations. While many criminal bosses fled or fought back openly, Cam courted the police with gifts, loans, and favors. Officers who were tempted to investigate found themselves suddenly promoted, transferred, or burdened with debts they could not repay. Others found their families quietly supported or threatened. Cam's relationship with the law was symbiotic and corrupt. This relationship was a key reason why he operated for decades with impunity, evading justice despite numerous rumors and suspicions. But Cam was not just a man of money and manipulation. Those who met him described a person capable of warmth and loyalty. To his close friends and family, he was generous and protective, even affectionate. He was known to host lavish celebrations and to take care of the people who stood by him. Yet, this kindness never compromised his ruthless business sense. His downfall, however, revealed the limits of his control. The tangled web he wove was dependent on secrecy and trust, and when one thread broke, the whole fabric began to unravel. When his inner circle turned against him, cooperating with authorities, it exposed the extent of his empire and his methods. The trials that followed shocked the nation, shining a harsh light on the dark interplay between crime and corruption. Numcom's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that no empire built on fear and bribery can last forever. Yet his legacy continues to shape the Vietnamese underworld, where his strategies and sayings remain quoted as lessons or warnings. Even now, his two famous lines resonate. "Money isn't everything, but people will do everything for money," and "what money can't buy can be bought with a lot more money." These aren't just words. They are a blueprint for power in a world where everything has a price. Numcom's life was punctuated by moments that revealed the true nature of his empire, a mix of brutality, cunning, and the cold calculation that kept him on top for so long. One of the most explosive events was the infamous murder of actor Viet An in 1997. Viet An had refused to pay protection money to Cam's network, and that defiance was met with swift and merciless retribution. The killing sent a clear message to anyone who dared to cross the boss. But it also began to stir public outrage and increased police scrutiny, shaking the once invisible foundation of Cam's empire. Another unforgettable chapter involved the rise and fall of his trusted lieutenant, Lee Bok Ho Keen, known as the White Tiger. Lee was once Cam's right hand, managing some of the most lucrative operations. But ambition and paranoia crept into their relationship. When Lee started building his own network, secretly cooperating with rival gangs and even law enforcement, it was the beginning of the end. Cam's ability to control his empire was slipping as internal fractures became visible cracks. The war with Dong Ha, the fierce queen of the underworld, also left a deep scar on Cam's reign. Their violent turf battles disrupted the city's nightlife and drew attention from both the media and police. The chaos they unleashed was unlike anything Saigon had seen. Public shootings, bombings, and kidnappings became headlines, forcing authorities to act decisively. Amid these violent clashes, Cam's reputation as a man who could buy anything with enough money was tested. There were rumors that he spent millions to silence witnesses, bribe officials, and even arrange false evidence. This immense power to manipulate reality around him kept the authorities at bay for years, but it was a dangerous game with high stakes. The police eventually cracked down in 2003, arresting Nam Kam in a raid that symbolized the government's growing determination to tackle organized crime. The trial was a national spectacle, revealing shocking details of corruption, bribery, and the inner workings of a criminal empire that had long operated in the shadows. Cam's sentencing was not just about justice. It was a signal that no one, no matter how powerful or rich, was above the law. Yet, for many in the underworld, Cam remained a legend. His methods, sayings, and style of leadership became part of the criminal folklore, a dark lesson in power, loyalty, and greed. Even in prison, his influence was felt. His story was told in whispers, his two famous quotes repeated like mantras. "Money isn't everything, but people will do everything for money." And, "What money can't buy can be bought with a lot more money." These words encapsulated the cold, transactional nature of his rule and the unyielding logic of the underworld. His legacy also sparked a broader conversation about corruption and crime in Vietnam. The entanglement of criminals with officials, the blurred lines between legal and illegal businesses, and the social costs of such empires were laid bare for all to see. For historians, journalists, and the curious alike, Nam Kam's story is a compelling, cautionary tale. A powerful man who built a vast empire through a mixture of fear, cunning, and sheer money power, only to see it crumble from within and without. And while his fall was dramatic, the lessons of his life endure. In the shadowy world of the Giang Ho, power remains fleeting, loyalty is costly, and the price of ambition is often paid in blood.